The sun beat down on the small town of Oak Creek, baking the pavement and making the air over the blacktop shimmer like a wavy mirror. It was the kind of slow, quiet afternoon where nothing much ever happened. You could hear the lazy buzzing of bees hovering over Mrs. Henderson's flower bushes next door and the far-off sound of a lawnmower a few streets over. For a little girl sitting on the worn wooden steps of her house, it was another long, boring day. She was 7 years old, with blonde hair tied up in 2 lopsided pigtails that were starting to come undone. Her name was Lily, and she was waiting. Her mom was inside, asleep on the couch after working a double shift at the local diner. Lily knew she had to be quiet, so she just sat, tracing shapes in the dust on the step with her finger. She felt a dull, familiar ache in her hips, the same one that made it hard to sit cross-legged on the floor during story time at school and made her fidget constantly in her chair. She shifted her weight, trying to find a comfortable position, but the ache was always there, a stubborn shadow she couldn't shake. Then, a new sound began to grow in the distance. It started as a low rumble, like faraway thunder, but it quickly got louder and deeper, shaking the window panes in their frames. Lily's eyes grew wide. She knew that sound. It was the motorcycles. Soon, a long line of them, like a rolling, rumbling metal snake, pulled into the gas station right across the street. The sign for Pete's Gas and Go flickered as if in greeting. The bikes were huge and gleaming, some with tall handlebars, all ridden by men and a few women dressed in leather vests covered with patches. They looked big and tough, with beards and tattoos, and their laughter was as loud as their engines. Most of the kids in town were told to stay away from them, to watch from a distance. And that's what Lily usually did. She would watch from her porch, a little scared but also fascinated by these real-life giants who appeared out of nowhere and then vanished down the road. But today was different. Today, the ache in her legs was worse than usual. It had been bothering her for months. She told her mom about it, of course. Her mom, who was always so tired from working so much, would give her a hug and say, "It's just growing pains, honey. Everyone gets them. You'll grow out of it." The doctor at the clinic had said pretty much the same thing during their last quick visit. But Lily didn't feel like she was growing out of it. She felt like the pain was growing with her. It was a secret she carried around, a heavy feeling that made it hard to run and play like the other kids. She felt alone with it as she watched the bikers stretch their legs, buy bottles of cold soda, and chat with each other in their rough, friendly voices. A crazy, brave idea popped into her head. These people weren't from here. They traveled everywhere. They had probably seen everything. Maybe, just maybe, they would know what to do. Maybe they would listen. Her heart started to pound against her ribs, feeling like a tiny, scared bird. This was the scariest thing she had ever thought of doing. But the ache in her legs was a stronger fear. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she pushed herself up from the step. The dust puffed around her sandals as she walked slowly, one small step at a time, off her porch and across the hot asphalt of the road. The bikers noticed her right away. The talking and laughter died down as the little girl in a faded pink t-shirt and shorts approached them. She was so small next to their towering bikes. She walked right up to the biggest man there. He had a long, graying beard and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, even though he looked very serious. His friends called him Bear. Lily stopped a few feet away from him, her courage almost failing her. She looked down at her dusty sandals, unable to meet his gaze. The man named Bear turned and saw her. He didn't shoo her away or tell her to get lost. Instead, his loud voice softened. "Well, hello there, little one," he said, bending down a little so he wasn't so tall. "What can we do for you?" The kindness in his voice was the final push she needed. She looked up, her big blue eyes filling with tears that she had been holding back for a long, long time. Her bottom lip trembled. All the words she had practiced in her head vanished, and the simplest, truest thing she could think of just tumbled out. I can't close my legs," she whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost carried away by the breeze. For a moment, there was complete silence. The rumbling engines were off. The chatter had stopped. The only sound was the buzzing of the bees from Mrs. Henderson's garden. The group of tough-looking bikers was frozen, staring at the tiny, trembling girl who had just shared her secret with them. The words hung in the hot afternoon air, simple, confusing, and deeply, deeply worrying. The silence that fell over the gas station was heavier than the summer heat. It was a thick, stunned quiet. For a few long seconds, nobody moved. The little girl's words, "I can't close my legs," just hung there. They were so simple, but they carried a weight that none of the bikers could immediately understand. They were used to dealing with flat tires, broken chains, and rough weather. They knew how to handle a fight or a loud argument. But this? A small, trembling child confessing something so personal and strange? This was entirely new territory. Their tough exteriors, built for the open road, seemed to melt away in an instant, replaced by a shared feeling of deep concern. The big man with the gray-streaked beard, the one called Bear, was the first to break the silence. He moved slowly, carefully, so as not to scare her. He knelt down right there on the oily pavement of the gas station, his leather jacket creaking with the movement. Now his eyes were level with hers. He wasn't a giant anymore. He was just a man listening to a little girl. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice so soft and low it was almost a whisper. "Can you tell me what hurts?" The girl, encouraged because he hadn't laughed or told her she was being silly, tried to find the words. The tears that had been welling in her eyes now traced clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. "It hurts here," she said, her small hands patting the tops of her legs, near her hips. "When I sit on the floor at school, my legs don't want to go like this." She tried to demonstrate, trying to pull her knees together, but she winced and stopped. "And at night, in bed, it feels stiff, like it's stuck. My mama says it's just growing pains. But it's been forever." As she spoke, she did something she'd probably done 1,000 times without even thinking about it. She stood in a slight, awkward way, shifting her weight from her left foot to her right foot, never really standing still. It wasn't the fidgeting of a bored child. It was the movement of someone who couldn't find a comfortable position, someone who was always trying to escape a constant, dull pain. A look passed between Bear and the woman standing nearest to him. She was also wearing a leather vest, and her hair was tied back in a practical braid. Her name was Doc, and she'd been a paramedic for many years before she retired. She had seen a lot of pain in her life, and she knew how to read people. She saw the genuine distress on the little girl's face and the way she held her body. This wasn't a child making up a story for attention. Bear's mind was racing, putting the pieces together. Can't close her legs. Hurts in the hips. For months. This wasn't a simple case of a scraped knee that a bandage could fix. This sounded like something deep inside, something that needed a real doctor, a specialist. The fact that the girl felt she had to walk up to a group of strangers to say something told him that maybe the adults in her life, for whatever reason, hadn't fully understood how bad it was. He gave the girl the gentlest smile he could manage, the kind that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. "Thank you," he said, his voice still low and calm. "Thank you for being so brave and for telling us. That was a really brave thing to do." He paused, choosing his next words very carefully. He didn't want to scare her, and he didn't want to overstep. But he knew they couldn't just get on their bikes and ride away. Not now. "My friend here," he said, nodding towards the woman called Doc. "She knows a lot about how bodies work. Do you think it would be okay if we walked with you back to your house? We'd like to talk to your mama for just a minute, if that's all right." The little girl looked from Bear's kind face to Doc's calm and serious one. She sniffled and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. These people weren't scary. They were listening. They believed her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like someone had actually heard her. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. Bear stood up, his knees popping. He looked at his friends, and a silent message was exchanged. Nobody made a joke. Nobody started their engine. They all just watched, their faces filled with a grim understanding. This was more important than making miles on the road. This was about a little girl who couldn't close her legs as the little girl turned and started to shuffle slowly back towards her house. Bear and Doc fell into step beside her, walking slowly to match her pace. The rest of the group stayed back, a silent, leather-clad guard of honor watching the most important mission they'd undertaken in a long time unfold across a dusty street in a quiet town. The real journey was just beginning. The walk across the street felt much longer than it really was. The little girl moved slowly, with that same slight, uncomfortable gait she had shown at the gas station. The big man, Bear, and the woman, Doc, walked patiently beside her, not rushing her at all. The sun was still hot, and the only sound was the crunch of their boots and her small sandals on the gravelly asphalt. Inside the house, the girl's mother was woken from a deep sleep by the sound of the screen door creaking open. She had been dreaming of the diner, of the endless clatter of plates and the smell of coffee. She worked long hours to keep a roof over their heads, and sleep was a precious thing. She sat up on the couch, rubbing her eyes, and saw her daughter coming inside. But her daughter wasn't alone. Following close behind were two of the bikers. The mother's heart gave a sudden, frightened leap. Her first thought was one of pure panic. What had happened? Had her daughter gotten into trouble? Had she bothered them? She stood up quickly, her body still heavy with sleep, and moved to the screen door. She pushed it open just as they reached the bottom of the porch steps. Her face was a mixture of worry, confusion, and a little bit of defensiveness. She put a hand on her daughter's shoulder, pulling her gently behind her, creating a barrier between her child and the two strangers. She looked at the large, bearded man and the serious-looking woman, her eyes asking a question her mouth hadn't yet formed. Bear saw the fear in her eyes immediately. He stopped right at the bottom of the steps, not coming any closer. He wanted to seem as non-threatening as possible. He took off his hat, holding it in his big, rough hands. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. It was a sign of respect. "Ma'am," he began, his voice still soft, just like it had been with the little girl. "Please don't be alarmed. We're not here to cause any trouble. Your daughter, she came over to talk to us." The mother looked down at her daughter, who was peeking out from behind her legs. "Lily, what did you do?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "She was very brave," Doc spoke up, her voice calm and clear. "She came to us because she was upset. She told us something that we felt we needed to share with you." Bear nodded, choosing his words very, very carefully. He knew this was a delicate situation. He didn't want to accuse this tired-looking woman of anything. He could see she loved her daughter. Life was just hard sometimes. "She told us, ma'am," Bear said, "that she can't close her legs, that it hurts her, especially in her hips. She said it's been hurting for a long time." The mother's face changed. The initial fear and defensiveness melted away, replaced by a flush of embarrassment and a deep, weary sadness. She let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all her worries. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She looked exhausted. "She's been saying that for months. I've taken her to the clinic. The doctor there said it's probably just growing pains. He said lots of kids get aches in their legs. He said she would grow out of it." She looked from Bear to Doc, her eyes pleading for them to understand. "We don't have the money for a bunch of specialists or fancy tests. I'm doing the best I can." This was the heart of it. It wasn't that she didn't care. It was that she was trapped by long work hours, by limited money, and by a doctor's quick dismissal. She had trusted the doctor's opinion because she had to. This was when Doc took a small step forward. She kept her hands at her sides, her posture non-threatening. "I'm not a doctor," she said plainly, "but I was a paramedic for many, many years. I've seen a lot of things. And what your daughter is describing, the specific pain in the hips, the trouble moving her legs together, and for such a long time, it sounds like it could be something more than just growing pains." The mother's eyes locked onto Doc's. The word paramedic carried a weight that got her attention. This wasn't just a random biker. This was someone with real medical experience. "There's a condition some children get," Doc continued, her voice gentle but firm. "It has to do with the hip joint. The blood flow, it can get interrupted. It makes the bone weak, and it causes a lot of pain exactly where your daughter is pointing. It's called Perta's disease." She said the name slowly and clearly. It was a real thing. It had a name. For the mother, this was a lightning bolt. For months, Her daughter's pain had been a vague, shapeless worry. Now suddenly it had a name. It was a real, specific condition that someone could recognize just from a description. The mother's tough exterior finally crumbled. The fear she had been pushing down for months, the nagging feeling that maybe it was something more, rose to the surface. Her eyes filled with tears, and her hand, which was still on her daughter's shoulder, began to tremble slightly. She looked from Doc's sincere face to Bear's concerned one, and then down at her little girl, who was looking up at her with those big, hopeful eyes. The strangers weren't criticizing her. They weren't there to cause trouble. They were there because a little girl was in pain, and they were offering a lifeline, a piece of information that might just change everything. The mother took a shaky breath, the first brick in her wall of worry beginning to fall. The mother stood on the porch for a long moment, just letting the new information settle in her mind. A name. The pain had a name. She looked at the two bikers, really looked at them, and saw no judgment in their eyes. She saw only a genuine desire to help. She nodded slowly, a silent thank you, before she gently guided her daughter back inside the house. Bear and Doc walked back across the street to the gas station. The rest of the group was still there, leaning against their bikes or sitting on the curb. They hadn't started their engines. They hadn't left. They were waiting. The moment Bear and Doc got close, everyone looked at them, their faces full of questions. Bear didn't say anything at first. He just walked over to the ice cooler outside the gas station door, pulled out a bottle of water, and took a long drink. The cold water felt good on his dry throat. He finally turned to face his friends. "It's bad," he said, his voice low and serious. "The little girl, she's in real pain. The mom is trying, but she's got no money, and the local doctor just brushed it off as growing pains." Doc stepped forward. "It sounds a lot like Perta's disease," she explained to the group. "It's a problem with the hip bone in kids. If it's not treated, it can cause a lot of problems later. She needs to see a specialist at a children's hospital, probably in the city." A quiet murmur went through the group. These were people who lived on the road. They knew all about problems that couldn't be fixed with a simple tool. They also had a deep, unspoken code. You see someone in trouble, you help. It doesn't matter who they are. One of the other men, a quiet fellow they called Mouse because he was so soft-spoken, finally broke the silence. "So what's the plan, Bear?" Bear looked around at the circle of faces. He saw the same determination in every pair of eyes. They were all thinking the same thing. "We have the fund," Bear said simply. The fund was something they all contributed to every month. It was for emergencies on the road. A broken-down bike, a member who needed help with a bill, or sometimes, for helping out in a town they were passing through. It was their way of looking out for each other and for others. There were no arguments, just a series of firm nods. The decision was made. Over the next hour, the parking lot of Pete's Gas and Go became their command center. While Doc used her old contacts to call the children's hospital in the city, 2 hours away, to explain the situation and see how quickly they could get the girl an appointment, others were making different plans. They weren't just going to give the family money for a bus ticket. That felt too cold, too distant. They had started this, and they were going to see it through. The idea came from one of the younger members. "We should take her," he said, "in a sidecar. Make an event of it. Show her she's not alone." The idea was perfect. It was grand. It was memorable. It would make a scared little girl feel like a princess for a day, instead of a sick child. The next Saturday morning, the main street of the small town was just waking up. Shopkeepers were sweeping their front steps. A few early customers were getting coffee. It was another quiet, ordinary morning. Then, they heard it started as a low hum in the distance, a sound that was becoming familiar. But this time it was different. It wasn't a random rumble passing through. It was organized, purposeful. Soon, a line of motorcycles appeared at the end of the main street. They weren't speeding. They were riding slowly, in a perfect, respectful formation. People came out of the shops to watch. They saw the same leather-clad bikers from the week before. But something was different. At the front of the pack, on Bear's big, gleaming motorcycle, was a sidecar. And inside that sidecar, wearing a brand new, shiny child-sized helmet, was the little girl from the house across from the gas station. She wasn't crying. She wasn't scared. She was beaming, a smile so wide it could barely fit on her little face. She waved shyly at the people on the sidewalk, her eyes shining with excitement. Following right behind Bear's bike was Doc's truck. Inside, the girl's mother sat in the passenger seat. She was watching the incredible scene unfold in front of her. She saw the procession of bikes, a rolling shield of support for her daughter. She saw the people of her own town, her neighbors, watching with looks of shock and then, slowly understanding. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and tears were streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness or fear anymore. They were tears of overwhelming hope. She had felt so alone in her worry for so long. Now, she was part of a convoy, surrounded by 20 strangers who had become her family in a moment of need. They weren't just going to the hospital. They were making a statement. They were turning a scary, lonely trip into a journey of hope. The rumble of the engines wasn't a noise of fear anymore. It was the sound of a community waking up and a little girl's life about to change. The trip to the big children's hospital in the city was something the little girl would remember for the rest of her life. Sitting in that sidecar, the wind whipping past, with a line of her own personal guardians on motorcycles behind her, she felt like the most important person in the world. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about the ache in her legs. She was just feeling the joy of the moment. At the hospital, the doctors and nurses were a little surprised at first by the group of bikers who filled the waiting room. But the sight of the small, brave girl and her grateful mother quickly made them understand this was something special. The bikers waited patiently, their quiet presence a solid rock of support in a place that could feel scary and cold. The doctors did their exams. They took x-rays and asked a lot of questions. It took a few weeks for all the results to come back. But when they did, it brought a strange sense of relief to the mother. The woman called Doc had been right. The official diagnosis was Legg-Calvé-Perthes disease. It was a mouthful of a name, but it explained everything. It was a condition where the ball of the hip joint, because of a lack of blood flow, becomes soft and can start to collapse. It was the reason she couldn't close her legs without pain. It was the reason for the constant, dull ache. It wasn't just growing pains. It was a real medical problem, and more importantly, it was something that could be treated. The treatment wouldn't be easy. It would involve special braces to hold her hips in the right position, and a lot of physical therapy to keep the joints moving properly. It would mean many more trips back to the city. But now they had a path to follow. They had a plan. The unknown fear was gone, replaced by the hard but hopeful work of getting better. Back in the small town, the story of what the bikers had done spread like wildfire. It was the only thing people talked about at the diner, the grocery store, and the post office. The town, which had always been a little wary of the rough-looking strangers who rode through, felt a deep sense of shame for their judgment. They had seen the leather and the tattoos, but they hadn't seen the hearts inside. A feeling grew in the town, a feeling that they needed to do their part. The bikers had started this. It was up to the town to finish it. The local pastor, the school principal, and the owner of the diner where the mother worked got together and organized a fundraiser. They called it a ride for our girl, and they invited the Iron Scribes to be the guests of honor. On the day of the fundraiser, the town square was packed. There were bake sales and raffle tickets and a big barbecue. And when the familiar rumble of the motorcycles was heard coming down the main street, everyone stopped and cheered. They weren't outsiders anymore. They were heroes. The little girl was there too, wearing her new brace under her clothes. She still walked with a slight limp, but she had a big smile on her face. She ran up to Bear and Doc as they got off their bikes, giving them both a tight hug. She didn't have to say much. The hug said it all. The fundraiser raised more than enough money to cover all the travel to the hospital and the costs of the therapy that the family's insurance wouldn't pay for. The financial burden that had weighed so heavily on the mother was lifted. She could finally breathe. The story doesn't end with a magical, instant cure. The little girl still had a long road of therapy ahead of her. There would be good days and bad days. But the feeling of being alone with her pain was gone forever. In Oak Creek. The sound of a motorcycle is different now. It's not a noise that makes people lock their doors or pull their children close. It's a sound that makes them smile and look up, remembering the day a group of unlikely angels rolled into town and taught everyone a lesson about looking past the surface. The little girl learned that bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about speaking up even when you are. The mother learned that it's okay to ask for help, and that kindness can come from the most unexpected places. And the town learned that a real hero isn't defined by what they look like, but by what they are willing to do for someone in need. The bikers didn't just help one little girl. They changed an entire town's way of seeing the world, simply by listening to a whisper for help and refusing to ride away.